Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of the
We Got It podcast.
We are in a super fun location. For those of you who are just listening to this, we're actually sitting on the court of the Breslin Student Event Center, just following the game victory against Western Michigan University. So it feels a little surreal sitting down here, I'm not going to lie, but we're just having a blast. I am going to apologize in advance. The acoustics in this place are just a little too good. So you might hear some funny background noises. We'll try to keep things going and entertaining for you to drown most of them out. But we are just here to recap the game, talk a little bit about what is staring Michigan State basketball down in the year of 2025, which is coming up way too quickly. And we're just glad that you're here. The We Got It podcast is an official podcast of Spartans Illustrated, and we are so thankful to be here as part of their media today and being able to bring you guys courtside with us.
And as always, we appreciate you guys. If you guys can like, follow, and subscribe along with all of our platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, on social media. All of that helps just grow our audience and reach to help more Spartan fans feel like they got it covered too.
Welcome to the We Got It podcast,
a Michigan State sports podcast for everyone.
We're Jonah and Abby, a husband and wife who's probably a little too obsessed with Spartan sports.
And we want to share a little bit of that obsession with you, from casual fans
to die-hard bleed green fanatics.
And we want to make following Spartan sports easy, enjoyable, and engaging for everyone.
Go green!
Well, obviously, for those of you who are watching the show today, we are no longer in the Breslin Center. We are back in our living room with the nice fire in the background.
We got kicked out.
Well,
just kidding.
No, we didn't get kicked out, but apparently even 2.5 hours after the basketball game, there is a team that goes through all the rows with leaf blowers, collecting all the popcorn that you guys left behind, and not conducive to a podcast. I don't think you guys want to hear leaf blowers louder than our voices for the entire show.
We tried. We really tried. We really wanted to bring you courtside, but then, the listening experience won out. So sorry for those of you that are watching. Hope you enjoyed that quick glimpse of the Breslin Center court. But yeah, now we got you with all the cozy vibes for the rest of our conversation today. So let's just dive straight into it.
Yeah, so obviously Michigan State took on Western Michigan yesterday for their last non-conference game of the season. Come away with an 80-62 victory, but how are we feeling after that win?
Is meh a word? M-E-H. I just feel like, very ambivalent about that win.
Yeah. No, I'd agree. Definitely was another sluggish start. Got off to I think a 8-3 deficit to start the game.
Yes.
Kind of had to play catch up for a little bit.
Finally took the lead, I think, with about 12 minutes left in the first half. I think it was 11-8 maybe, or 11-10 at that point.
Right. But yeah, like you said, sluggish start. Kind of seemed like, I don't know if it's that holiday kind of hangover, looking ahead to Big Ten play.
Yes.
Just a sloppy game in general. Sounded like maybe some of the guys might have not been feeling super well, including Jackson Kohler. So probably a combination of a lot of different things.
Absolutely.
But wasn't the prettiest game to witness, that's for sure.
No. And I think that is the challenging thing about playing any of these mid-major teams, especially over Christmas break. Tom Izzo was talking about in his post-game press conference, the double Ds, the dirtbags and the distractions, which must be some term that he uses with his guys of I have talked to these guys every single day of Christmas break about the distractions that can come. And he said, apparently I didn't do it enough. And I just think it's so easy for Spartan fans or for, I think it's fair for the coaching staff to want to constantly do better and look at those sorts of wins and say, what could we do more? Because that kind of a win is not going to hold up in Big Ten play. But I think for those of us that want to be negative about that win, keeping in mind, I'm just struck every time I'm close to the players of these are student athletes. And yes, they're getting paid money to do this. Yes, they're getting a lot of perks that players 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 years ago were not anywhere close to getting. But they're still human beings who still want to enjoy the holidays with their family. And I think there's a little bit of grace that needs to be given in these games. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion.
I mean, yeah, I'm not really panicking at all about the
No.
game. I don't think there's really any cause for concern. These games happen. It was still a 20-point victory. There were still some pretty standout performances. I mean, Jaden Akins finished with 18 points.
The quietest 18 points.
Right. Carson Cooper had a really good, especially second half in today's game, finishing with career high 13 points, 6 rebounds. He was 5 for 6 from the field, 3 for 3 from the free throw line, so really efficient on the night. Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton you can take out of this game, I don't think, especially like going into Big Ten play. I don't think there's any like referendum moments where it's, oh man, like this is some big takeaway that some big concern or something really to be excited about. But they got through it. Yeah. They're 11-2 heading into the big stretch of conference play here with already 2 wins locked up in the Big Ten. And I think all their goals are still ahead of them.
And I think it more matters from the standpoint of, I think people look at this as the last game before Big Ten play. And I think exactly like you said, there's this desire to want to extrapolate out from this one game. What does this mean for the rest of the season? And I think it's one that you tally in the win column, you move on from it. And maybe you practice a little harder to get ready for Ohio State coming up this weekend. I think the one really fun thing about the Western Michigan game was having Dwayne Stevens back in the building.
Yeah, that was fun.
Just a cool matchup and cool seeing him and Tom connect. And it was interesting kind of hearing some of his comments after the game of he just was saying how weird it was being back and being on the opponent side and being in the opponent locker rooms and staying in the hotel that he stayed in when he was on the basketball team back in the late 80s, early 90s. And so it was just really unique hearing from his perspective. And I think probably my favorite thing that he talked about was someone in the post-game press conference asked him something along the lines of like, did you hear the voice of Judd at all being back in the building? And he goes, no, I didn't hear Judd. He said, I think I thought I was him for a little bit getting that technical, which is just pretty great. And it's so crazy to think about just the legacy and the consistency of how rare it is for a major college team to have the same coach for 28, 29 years. And then before that, he was an assistant. And then before that, we had Judd Heathcote, who was around forever. And even talking about Dwayne Stevens, like he started there as a player, like I said, back in the late 80s, early 90s, stayed on as an assistant coach for a good long while, and now has his own head coach position in the state of Michigan. Like just that sort of tenure and that loyalty and commitment at Michigan State. It's just fun to see. And that's why I enjoy that Western Michigan game even more now that Dwayne Stevens is the coach there.
Right. And his team really had a lot of the same identity as Michigan State, looking to do a lot of similar things, trying to force turnovers, trying to run the fast break, be aggressive on the rebounding. Like you could definitely tell that was a team that had kind of
elements of Tom
Izzo in its game. And I mean, Izzo mentioned that after the game as well, like they did look a lot like us in a lot of ways. But yeah, it was just it's always fun to have these holiday games where a lot of fans can come out with more room without the students to witness all of that. But I think maybe not the best feeling going into Big Ten play, which is like a sloppy game. Maybe seems a little bit more to be desired. But overall, like I said, we're still 11-2.
Yes.
We took care of business when we needed to take care of it. And now we have a big stretch of games where we got to start stringing more wins together.
Absolutely. And we'll dive more into what does Big Ten Conference play look like? What does the stage for March look like in our We Got It Covered segment? But before we move on and check in at halftime with all of our other Spartan sports, we got to do a player of the week still. We got to keep this going. So I called it last week. I'm going to give you the tough task of naming a player of the week out of a pretty mediocre game. And we really only had one game this week. So it's going to be a little bit of a tough one for you.
I mean,
got the stat sheet over there trying to bolster that.
I know. Pick. I mean, It's hard with just one game.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like you got to go with Jaden Akins.
agreed.
Um, 18 points on the day, leading the Spartans. Kind of was that cool collective presence throughout the night when there was maybe some sluggish
Yes.
aspects of the game. He kind of seemed to be pretty consistent throughout the night.
And when I say quiet, I mean that as a compliment. Like, you almost don't notice how easy it was for
Mm-hmm.
him to just put up 18 points. I want to volunteer a aspect of the week.
Okay.
Which is hitting our free throws. I mean, that was huge. I think Carson Cooper was like 4 for 4 from the line.
Yep.
Frankie Fiddler, wasn't he 6 for 6 something? Maybe I've gotten those mixed
Cohen
up. But
Carr was 6 for 6.
Cohen
Frankie was
Carr.
4 for 4.
Okay, thank you.
Jaden Akins was 4 for 4.
Jenkins, we're going to start calling him that.
Carson Cooper was 3 for 3. So yeah.
Excellent free throw shooting. And so I think that that's something I know Tom mentioned he would have liked to see us get to the line more in general against Western Michigan. But man, if we can continue to shoot lights out from the free throw line heading into Big Ten play, which is notoriously physical, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is going to be the difference maker in a lot of these, close wins or losses, especially on the road. If you can keep your cool, if you can hit your free throws and some of those, they're going to be there, like tough end game situations, that just might be the difference maker for the Spartans. So I hope to see that continues on.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't just been like this game. It's been throughout the whole entire season. They've been shooting at a really high clip. I mean, today they shot over 90%. Mm-hmm. And I think as a team, they're shooting around 80% on the year, which is pretty phenomenal. And like you said, like that's going to help you win some games in January and February when you're maybe not hitting your outside shots, but you can hit your free throws and kind of squeak out some of those wins. That's going to be huge.
Definitely. Well, I think that about wraps it up. There's not too much more to say about that Western Michigan game. If you want to hear more, I know that Spartans Illustrated has an excellent article coming out about just the Tom Izzo press conference catch up. He had some phenomenal quotes from that. He was feeling a little salty after that win, but I think that there is a lot to look forward to with the continued conference play at Ohio State coming up this weekend. It's time now for our halftime check-in so we can see what else is happening in the Spartan sports world. It's been a busy weekend, specifically for hockey and for women's basketball.
Yeah, so starting off with the women's basketball team, your number 19 Spartans headed down to Maryland for the weekend to face number 8 Maryland Terrapins.
Okay.
And what was a pretty hotly contested game throughout. I think the Spartans got down to about 9 at half, were able to fight back and eventually tie it late in the fourth quarter, brought it within 1 point another time. Unfortunately, the effort was not enough as Maryland squeaked out of the game with a 72-66 victory over the Spartans. So the Spartans are now 11-2 on the season. 1-1 in the Big Ten play, but still a lot to look forward to with this women's team throughout the season.
Absolutely. And Big Ten on the road is always going to be one of the most challenging environments, especially against a top 10 team. So I think there's still a lot of hope for the women's Spartans team. By no means should you be thrown in the towel. They got the same record as the men.
Yeah.
Outside of conference play. So keep your heads up. I'm so proud of our Spartan women's team and hope to see them continue to just do really well this season. But on the other side, we had a lot of happiness and victory for the MSU hockey team, despite having several players be at the Junior World Championships. And so tell us a little bit about what happened with the Great Lakes Invitational taking place in Grand Rapids, Michigan this weekend.
Yeah, so at Van Andel Arena this weekend, the Spartans started off the Great Lakes Invitational against Northern Michigan, where they were able to really dominate throughout the game and
shut them right out.
Yeah, come away with I believe it was a 3-0 victory over Northern Michigan to get a chance to play in the championship on Monday when they face the number 4 Western Michigan Broncos. So big matchup.
Yes.
Number 1 versus number 4.
It's just a Western Michigan MSU kind of day.
Yeah, it was. And just like in men's basketball, the men's hockey team took care of business 3-1 versus the Broncos. They got down, I believe, 1-0 for all of 11 seconds before they tied the game, and then were able to kind of take control of things in the third period with a couple of goals. to secure their first Great Lakes Invitational Championship since
2009.
2009. So it's been a while, been 15 years. Nightingale and this program is continuing to add hardware to this trophy case in the last couple seasons, and
Absolutely.
they have their sets for a lot more throughout the season.
And just speaking of their absolute dominance, Michigan State is sitting at number 1 in the hockey rankings, and they have wins over number 2,
Boston College,
number 3, Minnesota, and number 4, Western Michigan. So really just solidifying themselves where they should be in those rankings, and hopefully we'll just continue to give them that edge heading into 2025. Well, on this eve of a new year, 2025, there is a lot for Spartan men's basketball to look forward to. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it is never too early to start talking about March. I know that Tom Izzo has his sights fixed on that. And so we've got a We Got It Covered segment for you, all about where do the Spartans currently stand when it comes to those net rankings, those quadrant wins, those quadrant losses, all that weird stuff that starts flying around as we get closer to March, because I think that whole process is confusing, and it doesn't start leading up to Selection Sunday. It started back in November.
Mm-hmm.
The NCAA tournament selection team, they are looking at how do all of these different teams who are competing for a spot in the NCAA tournament stack up against one another. And to be honest, I could give you a little bit of information about that, but we're going to really rely on Jonah to kind of take us through that. For those of you who might be new or have forgotten, this segment, the We Got It Covered segment, is to really help you feel like you've got it covered too when it comes to these kind of nuanced elements of sports, those things that keep you from saying anything in those conversations with your coworkers when they're talking about Spartan sports, or those conversations with your family, or, you're the woman trying to break into a group of guys talking about sports. And it's not that you need to know everything, but we're here to help you feel just a little bit more confident in those conversations and feeling like you really understand what's going on as well. And for me, I think a barrier for a long time was just even understanding how does the selection process work for the NCAA tournament. So let's start with where the Spartans are right now. How is MSU stacking up when it comes to, the NCAA selection for the NCAA tournament? If it were to happen right now, do you think we'd make it into the tournament?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I don't think Michigan State has any worries about making the tournament or not, buried in kind of a major collapse in conference play. I think Michigan State's very solidly in the at-large pool right now, not necessarily having to win their conference tournament in order to get in. Obviously, right now, a lot of these are projections on kind of where things stand now.
There's a lot of games left to play. I mean, we've got 18 more conference games coming up. So like you said, barring a big collapse or big injuries, knocking on wood over here, we don't want any of that to happen. There's a lot left to do before we really know. So it's all projections at this point.
And if you kind of look at different, bracketologists, guys who kind of make their own brackets based on where they think things stand right now, it can vary quite a bit. Obviously, you can look at a lot of different bracketologists and kind of see where they see the Spartans now. And obviously, at this point, it's like, who do you trust looking at these bracketologists? I found a website, it's called Bracket Matrix, where it kind of compiles about 400 different bracketologists and where they currently have
when
different teams.
When you first started saying, I was like, this is some sketchy website, but that makes more sense.
But yeah, so it kind of gives you kind of an average of where everybody kind of sees the tournament looking right now. And right now, Michigan State is solidly at a number 4 seed, the number 15 overall seed in the tournament, which
I will take that with where we're at right now.
It's been quite a bit since Michigan State's been really a top 5 seed. It's been, you have to look back to 2019, last time they were seated that high, which I think a lot of Spartans would be happy with.
Thrilled, yes.
Obviously, though, like we said, though, a lot of that depends on how conference
absolutely
play goes and how they continue to perform. Obviously, if they continue at this level, I think that's very attainable. I think they could even climb above that if they have a good conference play. But if they start dropping games, it won't take long for them to start kind of dropping down that projected seed line.
Absolutely.
And like you said, like this evaluation process for the selection committee goes throughout the whole entire season, and they're constantly kind of moving teams
and
around.
Not just conference play, non-conference games as well. Absolutely.
And the main evaluation tool that they use is their net rankings, which is kind of updated every single day, and it's kind of their main way that they use to kind of compare teams to one another. And the biggest way they do that is kind of by putting each game in different boxes or quadrants based off of what the committee believes to be more difficult or easier.
Interesting. So that's what I was wondering, because the quadrant wins or losses, which we'll get into a little bit more, are based on where teams are in the net rankings. But then it's also this like catch-22, because the net rankings are based on how many quadrant and types of like wins and losses that you have. So how do they initially even get those net rankings going? Is it based off of the previous year? Like how do you, first game of the season, how do you determine if something's a quadrant 1 win or a quadrant 4 loss or like any of those things?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely, you could go on probably down that rabbit trail for quite a while.
And I think that's my point, is that, I think that there is this guise of all this objectivity when it comes to selection, and we're basing everything off of objective rankings and objective wins, but there is some elements of subjectivity, and it's still someone determining that across these different conferences, we can look and see, these mid-major teams played these teams in the Big Ten, but then they also maybe played these teams in the ACC or whatever, like maybe, or, these mid-major teams played each other, and this is how they did against different teams in Power Four conferences. But there's always going to be some element of subjectivity to it. And I think that's where my pettiness comes in, because I feel like inevitably on Selection Sunday, and I'm sure everybody feels about this for their own team, of like, are you kidding me? That's the ranking that we got. So take us through, though, a little bit more of the objectivity. Can you talk through what are the difference between like quadrant 1 wins, quadrant 4 losses, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So like I said, the committee places each game within a quadrant. So depending on where a team ranks and where the location of that game is determines what quadrant that game will be placed in.
Okay.
So for a quadrant 1 win, which is kind of those top wins against the best teams.
And that's how they're determining part of like your strength of schedule and what your wins actually mean. Because you could have one team who goes 20-0 in conference play, and you could have another team that goes, 15-5 in conference play. But depending on their strength of schedule, that 20-0 team from a mid-major conference might not really mean a whole lot.
Right. No, exactly. So for a quad 1 win, if you are playing at home, any game against a team ranked number 1 through 30 in the net rankings will be considered a quad 1 win.
Okay.
If that game were to take place on a neutral court, so thinking of Michigan State played in Maui or the Champions Classic, they play Rutgers at Madison Square Garden, which I believe usually, even though it's technically a Rutgers home game, the committee considers it a neutral court. That would be considered a quad 1 victory if that was a team ranked 1 through 50. So it kind of, that increases as the level of difficulty of where you're playing takes place. And to go further with that, a road game against a team ranked 1 through 75 is considered a quad 1 game. So really, the committee does put a lot of emphasis not only on who you play, but where you're playing them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, anybody who's followed college basketball knows how hard it is to win on the road, especially in conference play. So playing a team, maybe it's ranked 74 or 75 on the road, is still considered a quadrant 1 win, even though at home you were playing that team, it would be a quad 2 or 3 game.
Absolutely. So then how does that work if you lose that game? If you are playing, let's say, Rutgers in a neutral location. Maybe I'm making this too hard. Let's make it a little easier. Let's say we're playing Kansas at home, which is not going to happen, but let's just,
Yeah.
for the sake of the analogy, Kansas at home, and you lose that game. Is that then a quad 1 loss, or is that a quad 4 loss? Like, what does
No, yeah,
that
no
look like?
matter if Kansas is ranked, I don't know what they're ranked. I think they're top 5 in the net
Yeah.
rankings right now. If you're playing them at home, that's a quad 1 game, no matter if you win
Okay.
or lose. So
Okay.
that's really, especially
I didn't know if it like inverted when it was a loss, but that helps make things a little bit
Right.
simpler. Like depending on where the team's ranked and where it's being played, you know, so for Kansas, that would be a quad 1 win for them and a quad 1 loss for us because they're playing on the road. It is a little interesting because I feel like it doesn't give enough credit for road wins against top 25 teams because that's counted the exact same as if you went and beat, you know, somebody in the 70s. Maybe it's, who knows, Boise State or something.
Right.
I'm just throwing out a random team. Like beating them on the road counts the same for beating a Kansas on the road.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there definitely isn't, it's not a perfect system. I think, but I think it has been kind of the best system that the committee has had. And at least two is a pretty like clear way that the observer can kind of know how the committee is evaluating and comparing teams, or it makes sense. They can see the process. They can kind of keep track on their own. And I think that's kind of refreshing to kind of just have some more of that, just like openness about how the committee is actually evaluating teams. But come in February and March, when these conversations are getting harder and tighter, like those quadrant games are really going to have a big impact as far as where the committee slot teams above or below teams. So if you have two teams, one in the SEC, one in the Big 12 with similar records, kind of like how you were mentioning, but Team A is 7-2 in quad 1 games, where Team B is 3-4 in quad 1 wins, or maybe they're 1-4 in quad 1, because obviously, like,
not everybody's going to play the same number of quad 1 games either, depending on the strength of your schedule.
Exactly. So that really, like, the teams that have a lot of quad 1 wins, a lot of quad 1 games, those teams are really going to kind of be given precedent over maybe teams with similar records, still in a power conference, but with maybe a fraction of their quad 1 opportunities. On the flip side, as much as quad 1 wins and quad 2 wins are important, you really want to try to avoid those quad 3, quad 4 losses, because those can really, really hurt you come March, especially for maybe those teams who are right on the bubble. If you have one or two of those really bad losses, that could be the difference between you getting in versus not.
And for sake of context, you know, a quad 4 loss would be like losing to a 100th ranked.
Right. I believe I can.
In the net rankings at home, right? Like we're talking like this is a game that you should win 99 out of 100 times. And you're having those losses. That's, you know, going to be a big factor, like you said, of making sure you're in or out.
Luckily for Michigan State, I think they will. I think they'll have another quad 4 game the rest of this season. So I think they finished like 4-0 against quad 4 teams. They haven't lost any teams in quad 3. They haven't lost any teams in quad 2. Michigan State, I think.
So we're sitting pretty
only
currently.
2 losses are against quad 1 opponents. So Michigan State doesn't have any bad losses right now that are kind of deterring them. Only one quad 1 win, but there's going to be plenty of opportunities in conference play to kind of add that to their repertoire. There's a lot of top 50, top 70, top 5 Big Ten teams. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Michigan State to not only get quad 1 opportunities, but stack quad one wins.
Absolutely. Well, now I kind of want to shift the conversation a little bit to what does that actually look like in conference play. So I think we briefly talked about this on a previous episode, but with the Big Ten now expanded to 18 teams, you're going to be playing 17 teams throughout the course of the season. There's 20 games. So that means you are playing 7 opponents only at home, 7 opponents only on the road, and then another 3 opponents where you're playing both home and away.
Right.
And so it is really interesting to think about strength of schedule even within the Big Ten, because you might have a team who is facing all of their hardest opponents at their home court.
Yeah.
And so that's going to really impact your strength of schedule in a way that, if there were only 10 teams in the Big Ten, like there originally was, you're playing every team on the road and at home. And so it's a lot easier. It's a lot cleaner to figure out who is actually the best team in the Big Ten. But when, being on the road, not having home court advantage is such a big deal in college basketball. And I would argue, especially in the Big Ten, you've got so many fan bases that show up so strongly for their teams. The IZone being one of the top student sections in the country as well. It just makes a huge impact. And so I thought it was really interesting for those of you who understand math a little bit better than me, or who get really excited about Dr. Green and White over on Spartans Illustrated. He put out an awesome 2-part article series this last week about what does Big Ten conference play actually look like? What does strength of schedule look like? And, my little brain took away some important takeaways. And I thought one thing that he said was really interesting is when you calculate it all out based on who's playing who at home, who's playing who on the road, what teams are being played twice across the whole Big Ten. If you're ranking, easiest schedule, which I think he said Penn State has the easiest schedule, to hardest schedule, which is Minnesota. MSU's a little bit on the easier side. But that is all to say that strength of schedule, the way he calculated it out, is all within 1 game of each other. So essentially, like, even Penn State with the easiest schedule is only 1 more win or 1 more game away from having the same difficulty as Minnesota. So it just shows like the Big Ten is so strong across the board, and you're really not going to ever get a break for the next 18 games that they're playing.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, because you only really face every team once, and you don't, it's obviously, like, a lot of those teams are only going to get a shot on at home or only on the road. So, for example, obviously the net rankings shift all the time.
Yeah, every day, right?
Yeah. But Purdue is ranked number 37th in the net rankings.
Okay.
I believe Michigan State plays Purdue at home this year.
Yes.
So right now, that Purdue game is a quad 2 game for Michigan State, where another team who's playing Purdue on the road, that's a quad 1 victory for them. So it kind of shows you 2 things. It shows you how much an opportunity road games are.
Yes.
Because if you can get those road wins, even against weaker teams, like we said, teams in the 60s or the 70s, that can really impact your resume come March. On the flip side, you don't want to slip up at home.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
You could then maybe have that quad 3 loss that you don't want to have on your resume. So, not that you can't slip up. Michigan State's not running the table in Big Ten play, but you really want to defend your home court so you don't get those lower quadrant losses. But also, man, on the road, especially in Big Ten play, pretty much every single game, I believe, is going to be either a quad 1 or quad 2 game.
Yeah, absolutely. So the stakes are high. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think exactly like you said, I kind of was almost taken aback by that. We were speaking with Carson Cooper after the Western Michigan game, and he was talking about how important it is, through the rest of Big Ten play to win every single home game. And he kept saying that. And I kind of was like, man, that's a tall order. But when you think about it like that, it's like the stakes are so high if you are losing a game at home, and you are bolstered by that IZone. You are bolstered by a Breslin Center that was absolutely packed out for a game against Western Michigan. And so you have to take advantage of that, and you have to show up, one, for the fans, but you also have to think about, you are competing with these other teams in the Big Ten for a tournament spot and for a good seed. And so every game that you lose not only hurts your chances, but helps your opponent get that leg up against you. And
Right.
maybe that seems like common sense, but I think a lot of times we just think about it in that, like, how does it help or hurt our status or our rankings? But know that you're also, hey, if I'm conceding, this quad one loss at home, I just gave someone else a quad one win. And
Right.
that's that opportunity for them to get that, 4 seed above us and for us to drop down, those sorts of
No,
things.
absolutely. Like bearing a big collapse, like every single home game.
Keep saying that. I got to knock on wood. I'm getting stressed.
Every single home game for Michigan State is going to be a quad one game
Yes.
for the opponent.
Yes, exactly.
And so they're going to want to have the opportunity. Like you're going to get every team's very best, because when they're playing at Michigan State, that's an awesome opportunity to get a very big win.
Absolutely. And we hope that our guys are approaching the road games like that as well. And we know that, I do not expect us, as much as our hot take of going 17-2 into that Illinois game in late January. I do not expect us to be 20-0 after conference play. Like, the Big Ten is just way too tough to ever even, I think, hope to be close to undefeated in the Big Ten. So, expect some losses on the road and hope that we are getting every single opportunity to win it at home that we can. If you are a Spartan fan that is able to go to the Breslin Center, you better be showing up for those guys. Tom was a little interesting in his talk after the Western Michigan game of talking about how much he, kind of let the fans down. It was a packed out stadium. But I'm going to push back a little bit and say, the loudest I ever heard all those old people getting was for when some guy made a court-long putt, and then when we got free chicken nuggets. So I'm just saying, like, get loud, get on your feet if you are at the Breslin Center. Make that home court advantage truly an advantage for those guys if you're showing up to games this season. I think that is helpful. My brain's spinning a little bit, but I think I've got a better understanding of, who we face in Big Ten play, really how high the stakes are. And like you said, at this point, barring, a terrible injury or something crazy happening, we should be in this tournament, especially if this team just continues to just perform at the level they have been, even if we don't see any more, improvement. Obviously, I hope we see lots of improvement, especially out of some of these transfer players that are still getting used to Big Ten play. I think they're going to grow a lot in these next couple of months. But even if we stay exactly where we are, I think we're firmly in the tournament. So at this point, it's now jockeying for how do we give ourselves the best leg up that we possibly can heading into March to get as deep of a run as we can.
Yeah, and no better opportunity than this upcoming Friday night on the road against Ohio State, which is solidly a quad one game. Ohio State is ranked number 25 in the net ranking. So even at home, this game would be a quad one game. And I think would probably end the season as a quad one win because Ohio State have to drop quite a lot for this not to be. So great opportunity for Michigan State to get that quad one win, to continue to improve their seeding and stacking wins in Big Ten play to try to get a banner.
Definitely. And Ohio State is always going to be a little bit of a wild card, especially on the road. So I am going to make a little bit of a prediction here.
Ooh, you don't usually like predictions unless I ask you.
I don't, but I'm feeling it. I think that if we can beat this Ohio State team this Friday, that is going to set us off on a great course for the rest of January. And I think if we lose, it's going to be a tough hole to dig out of. I mean, Tom was pretty salty after that win over Western Michigan. So I think those boys are going to have a lot to face if they don't come out of this weekend with a win.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, let's hope they do for everybody's sake.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us this week. As always, go green.
Go white.
Go state.